Hey y'all, so in this video, we're gonna be really going over two things. Number one, we're gonna do a guided practice on comparative advantage from the last video. And two, we're gonna go over terms of trade. And so just like the last video, this one's gonna be slightly longer because there's just a lot of things that we have to go over with it. How do you know a vampire is sick? She starts coughing. Alright, so before we head into terms of trade, which is going to be the bulk of this video, we're first going to go over the guided practice at the end of last video. So here, we are looking at the number of deer and antelope caught per day. So first off, is this an input or an output question? Well, it's an output question. And we know that because it's talking about the amount of deer and the amount of antelope that Jake and Daniel can catch per day, right? Just at the end of the day, the total number, the total result. So who has the absolute advantage? Well, here it's Daniel, right? Daniel has the absolute advantage in both deers and antelopes. Why? Well, because Daniel can catch more deer than Jake, 24-4. Daniel can also catch more antelope, 12-6, which thinking about it, I feel like 24 and 12 is just an insane number of animals to be catching in one day here. So Daniel has the absolute advantage in both. Well, now who has the comparative advantage in what? So remember, since this is an output question, right? Output question, the other number goes over. So if we're looking at deer, so one deer. Well, what if Jake is catching deer? Well, what is he giving up? Antelope. So if he can catch 4 deer, the other number is 6. 6 over 4, which is just 3/2 of an antelope. So this means one antelope, he is giving up 2/3 of a deer. Now for Daniel here. So for one deer, right, what is he giving up? Well, he's giving antelope. So if antelope is the opportunity cost here, well, it's just going to be 12 over 24, which is 1/2. And this means for every one antelope, Daniel is giving up 2 deer. So remember, whenever trying to find the comparative advantage, it's whoever has the lower per unit opportunity cost here. Well, for Jake, for every deer, he's giving up 3/2 of an antelope. For Daniel, for every deer, he is giving up 1/2 an antelope. So that means 1/2 is less than 3/2. So Daniel has the comparative advantage in the production of deer, or in the catching of deer. For antelopes, Jake, for every antelope, is giving up 2/3 of a deer. Daniel, for every antelope, is giving up 2 deer. So here, 2/3 is less than 2. So Jake, I erased that. Jake has the comparative advantage in the production of antelopes. So this means here, Daniel should only be catching deer, Jake should only be catching antelopes, and then they should trade with each other. And we're going to get into what are the terms of trade later on in this video. All right, so one more practice together. So in this guided practice, we're looking at the months it takes to produce one car and one plane. So for Canada, it takes them 8 months to produce a car and 10 months to produce a plane. For Japan, it takes them 15 months to produce a car and 12 months to produce a plane. I actually don't know just sort of what high-tech car they're producing if it takes them 3 months longer to produce a car than a plane. But, oh well. So is this first an input or an output question? Well, it's an input question. Why? Well, because we're not looking at how many cars and how many planes Canada and Japan could produce, but instead we're looking at the months it takes to produce a single car and a single plane for both countries. Well, then who has the absolute advantage? So this is a little bit tricky. We're going to say Canada has the absolute advantage in both production of cars and planes. Why? Well, remember, this is an input question. So here, if it takes a country less time to produce the same good, we're going to say, well, they have the absolute advantage there. So in this sense, it's different than an output question, right? Output question, you're just looking at who has the higher number, because if you can produce more things, you're in a better shape. Well, for input questions, if it takes less time or less resources, you're in a better shape here. And that's why for this particular question, Canada has the absolute advantage in the production of both planes and cars because it takes them less time. So here, who has the comparative advantage? Well, since this is an input question, the other number should go under. So IOU. So here, to produce one car, right? What are they giving up? Well, Canada is giving the production of planes to produce one car. So here, the other number goes other number goes under, so 8 over 10, which is just 4/5 of a plane. And then here, we just take the inverse, right? One plane, they're giving up 5/4 of a car. Well, now let's look at Japan, right? For one car, well, what are they giving up? Well, here, other number goes under, so 15 over 12, which is just 5/4 of a plane. Oh, wow. So this actually worked out really well. So one plane, they're giving up 4/5 of a car. So now we have to figure out who has the comparative advantage and what. And yet again, we have to look at our per unit opportunity cost. And so in this case, it doesn't matter whether you're looking at an input or an output question. If the country or the individual has the lower per unit opportunity cost, they should specialize and only produce that one good. They have the comparative advantage in that good here. So let's look at cars. So for Canada, to produce one car, they're giving up 4/5 of a plane. For Japan to produce one car, they're giving up 5/4 of a plane. So what's smaller, 4/5 or 5/4? Well, 4/5 is smaller because it's math, and you guys should know the numbers by now, right? So Canada has the comparative advantage in cars. What about for planes? Canada, for every plane, is given 5/4 of a car. Japan, for every plane, is given 4/5. Yet again, what's smaller? 4/5 is smaller. So Japan has the comparative advantage in the production of planes and should only produce planes here. So there was one other one, but if you guys just skip to this video, try to do this one by yourself, the answer should be in the notes section of the Google slide. So now let's talk about specialization in trade. So here, right, we're going to say both countries can benefit from trade if they have relatively lower opportunity costs. And we're going to call that terms of trade. And so here, after we figure out which country has the comparative advantage, we need to talk about, well, sort of how does that, or sort of what are some acceptable terms of trade there, right? And so let's look at this example here, right? So we have Myanmar and Vietnam with the production of pineapples and radios. And so here, instead of working through it for sake of time, I just gave you the per unit opportunity cost here, right? Myanmar, for every pineapple, they're giving up 1/3 of a radio. For Vietnam, for every pineapple, they're giving up 1 radio, right? And it's the same thing for radios, right? For every 1 radio, Myanmar is giving 3 pineapples. For every 1 radio, Vietnam is giving 1 pineapple. So that means Myanmar has the comparative advantage in pineapples. Vietnam has the comparative advantage in the production of radios. And so here, before we even get to terms of trade, Myanmar should only be producing pineapples. Vietnam should only be producing radios. But the problem with that is that both countries want what the other country is producing, right? Myanmar doesn't only want pineapples, they also want radios. Vietnam doesn't only want radios, they also want pineapples here. So what is an acceptable terms of trade? Well, if you read ahead, right, you see 1 radio for 2 pineapples is an acceptable term of trade. Why? Well, to figure out an acceptable terms of trade, we just have to look in between the 2 per unit opportunity costs, right? So it doesn't really matter which one we look at, but let's just look at radios because it has 2 whole numbers, 1 and 3. So here, for the production of radios, right, Myanmar is giving up 3 pineapples. Vietnam is giving up 1 pineapple. So an acceptable term of trade is anything in between 1 and 3. So we can say for 1 radio, they're willing to trade 1.1 pineapples, all the way up to 2.9 pineapples is an acceptable term of trade for both countries, right? So here, why doesn't Myanmar want to accept a term of trade that is 1 radio for 4 pineapples? Why is that a bad thing for Myanmar? Well, here, Myanmar, if you look, right, Myanmar is already producing 1 radio or they can produce 1 radio and give up 3 pineapples here. Well, the term of trade is 1 for 4. Myanmar is simply like, that sucks. We are just going to produce radios ourselves, right? Because here, they can just produce radios at a much lower opportunity cost than that term of trade there. So that's why it has to be between 1 and 3. And so if we look at pineapples, what's an acceptable term of trade for pineapple? So here, 1 pineapple for anything in between 1/3 and 1. So let's just say 1/2 radio Or we could say, right, 0.33, so 0.75, 0.34, whatever you want to. Anything in between 1/3 and 1 is going to be an acceptable term of trade. So to recap, to figure out terms of trade, you first have to figure out the comparative advantage and look at the per unit opportunity cost. And then anything in between the two per unit opportunity costs is an acceptable term of trade. Normally try to find the easiest possible number, like 2. All right, guys, so that's all I have for you guys today, and I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace.